today's special guest is Richard Douglas Jensen. And Richard Douglas Jensen is a successful independent filmmaker who has written, produced, and directed, co-starred in 4 feature-length films in 4 years. That's pretty impressive, Richard. As a teenager, he was inspired by the books of film scholar William K. Everson, and he charted a path to a life in cinema. He was a film actor in his teens and early 20s in Atlanta and Hollywood, of course. But roles dried up and he left the business to become a prominent criminal defense lawyer. Still, he kept his hand in the business behind the camera, writing and directing dozens of television commercials and 2 documentaries. At the age of 60, he became an overnight success when he got back into the film industry in a big way by co-producing Sad Hill Unearthed, a documentary shot in Spain about the 50th anniversary of the film classic, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which was nominated for the Spanish Oscar, the Goya. Very quickly, he wrote, produced, directed, and starred in No Man's Law, which was a hit in India, China, and Southeast Asia. He followed that up with I Am Mine Alone and Monster Grizzly, which we will be talking about today. He has a multi-picture distribution deal with a major distributor, and his films are streaming worldwide. The Kiss of a Vampire is scheduled for release in spring 2025. That's their Poverty Row's newest film. And his next film, Demon Wolf, which is in pre-production, begins shooting in June 2025. He has won more than a dozen Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Actor awards at film festivals all over the world and champions independent filmmaking everywhere he goes. So, Richard, thank you so much for coming on the show with us today.
Thank you, Henry. I appreciate it.
So, Richard, you know, I'm always inspired by any actor who starts their own thing. And I'm sure it was a Herculean task. What really drove you to create Poverty Row Productions?
Well, I have always been aware of the Ralph Waldo Emerson mantra that you are what you dream about. And I, from a very early age, was inspired about the filmmaking business from William K. Everson's books. He was kind of my mentor through his books. And so, unfortunately, the industry as a whole is not welcoming to newcomers, not welcoming to people who do not fit within the matrix of their systems. And I was very lucky to start in the film business during the last part of the transition from old Hollywood to the new Hollywood. So there was work to be had because the old-time producers and the old-time directors were hiring actors the old-fashioned way, you know, through agents and auditions and things like that. But what happened when the new order came in, it became impossible to get in the door. And so I essentially left the business in LA. I left the big time, as it were, even though I was a small fish in a big pond, because there was just no way to get in the door. And what happened was, after nearly 30 years of being a lawyer and dabbling in, you know, documentaries and putting a little money here and there, helping out some independent filmmakers, the whole world changed with the advent of streaming. And streaming is the most democratizing element in the history of film since the earliest days of film, when people trying to break the Edison Trust moved out to California to make their movies without having to give Thomas Edison a huge chunk of what they were making. Streaming came along and it made it where you could make a film. You can make a film for $10 if it's good enough and it's long enough. You can get some distributor to put it on a streaming channel because there is a tremendous demand for content. So my wife and I, we put some money in Sad Hill Unearthed. Quite by accident, I found about these bright filmmakers that were making this documentary, and they were short of money. So I offered up some money, and they were able, essentially I gave them end money. They were able to finish because I gave them some money. And it was just a big, I don't even know how you put it. It was like kismet. It was like serendipity. It just all fell into place. And suddenly I'm going to movie premieres and were nominated for the Goya, the Spanish Oscar. And after that, it was hard to ignore me when I called, and doors opened. And then I realized, okay, I can do this. I just have to literally not take no for an answer.
Mm. Well, you know, it really is an inspiration because I know how difficult and challenging it can be to create anything. So for you to do all of that, and especially that you mentioned, and I know even in your biography, that you took some time away from the production. You always had it there, but I can relate to that because when I was younger, I was into the creative arts, and then I stopped and worked in higher ed, and then it seems to call you back. So I get the sense that even when maybe it wasn't necessarily the focus in your life, undergirding everything, you still had that creative fire going on, and that really inspired you to move forward with your productions and with your films, right?
Well, I think that's it. I mean, I don't think it ever leaves you. I think you grow up and you get a day job. And I tell young people all the time, do not grow up and get a day job. If you want to be a filmmaker, you want to be a cameraman, if you want to be a sound person, whatever, if you want to do digital animation, don't do anything else. Do only the thing that you love. And if you can't find any work doing that where you live, go somewhere else. Take your skills, which are up here, and go to where you can find somebody who's willing to give you an opportunity. And then if nobody gives you an opportunity, save your nickels and dimes, and save up $1,000 and make something on your phone. I mean, Werner Herzog, the great director, who's one of my idols, is encouraging young filmmakers to make their films on their phone. If you've got nobody to give you any money, just make it on your phone and then learn how to market it.
Richard, as you're talking and you're telling us and sharing with us your story, I see Monster Grizzly behind you. And as you might know, if you've seen our channel, Mortisect, most of the people that watch it are fans of horror. And I see even in your newest film and then your one that's in pre-production, deals with horror. So would you be able to bring us to how you decided on creating Monster Grizzly? Because you wrote, directed, you starred in it. That's a lot of work, and especially trying to do all those roles on set. But what drove you in creating Monster Grizzly as a vehicle to be one of the films that Poverty Row put out?
Well, when I was a kid growing up, we used to get off the school bus at 3:30 and walk in the door. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and they had a TV show on every day from 3:30 to 5 that was called Dialing for Dollars. And they would show a horror movie. And it was usually the old Universal, Bela Lugosi's, Boris Karloff's, and then a lot of the independents from the 50s, like The Blob and things like that. So for years in my childhood, every day, Monday through Friday, 3:30 to 5, while I was doing my homework, I was watching horror films. And when I got a little bit older, I discovered I liked Westerns too, and I became absolutely ravenous for watching every Western I could see. But when I started back doing films, and I did No Man's Law, which was a politically charged action film, and then I did I Am Mine Alone, which was a slice of life, politically charged slice of life film. My wife, who co-executive produces with me, and I sat down and I said, okay, we've won roughly 10 Best Picture awards at film festivals, roughly 10 Best Director, multiple Best Screenplay. Okay, we've proven we can make films that are politically charged and have something to say. Now let's go do something fun. And so that's the desire to make Monster Grizzly came from. What would be a fun way to make a horror film? And I watch a lot of the new film and television content out of Iceland, which I don't know if you're watching, but Iceland has got a booming young film industry. And one of the characters in every film made in Iceland is snow, because they have snow. And they do a very good job in their films of using the snow as a character. It usually isolates people, that traps them in a place, those kinds of things. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to trap a small town in a blizzard and then have a ravenous monster grizzly prey upon the town, and the people have no means of escape? And that's where the idea came from.
Would you mind going a little bit into detail with the casting of the film? Because I
Yeah,
noticed, actually, noticed, Kelly Reno, who's from, I remember, Black Stallion with Mickey Rooney, and actually Vanessa Tamayo, who I interviewed a couple of episodes ago. So how do you read opposite the actors? What do you, I'm guessing you do most of the casting, or did you hire a casting director?
No, it's me, myself, and I productions, basically. My wife, of course, is a big part of it. And then I have a production team that I do contract basis, film by film. But no, I do all the casting myself, mainly because I write it. I know what I'm looking for. Uh, Vanessa Tamayo was a bolt out of the blue. I was not anticipating hiring a Latina from Colombia with a lovely Colombian accent for that role. It's just that I auditioned, and what we do is self-tape auditions, and I auditioned, dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of actors, and I came down to two, and I've discovered in this business in the last couple of years that agents are the biggest impediment to getting an actor cast in the history of this business, because I go to these agents and I say, hey, I'm interested in your actor. And they do everything they can to make you want to walk away. And Vanessa didn't have an agent at the time, and she self-submitted. And she was, she has a lengthy resume. She's been in the business some 15 years, and she's just a kid. She's like 30, I think. So she sent me a self-tape, and it was the best self-tape audition that I had for the whole film, and frankly, probably that I've ever had in my life. She's just an incredibly gifted actress, and she just personalized what she was doing. She made it seem as if it was a real conversation. And so what I do when I hire an actor is I will take the script and I will rewrite the character to add in the special qualities of the person who I cast. And so I just changed some dialogue scenes to reference the fact that she was from Colombia. And that's because, I mean, you've got this movie taking place in snowbound Idaho. And along comes this beautiful Colombian woman who's speaking with a light Colombian accent. So I just made a change. And so she was by far a great find for us for that film. She was very good in it. And Kelly Reno is a friend of mine. I have this, because I was shunned from the business essentially for years because no one would open a door to see whether I could do anything. And I kind of got pushed out of the business in my 20s. I have a special place in my heart for other actors that happened to, and that's what happened to Kelly Reno. He was rocking along with the Black Stallion movies and working with Steven Spielberg and Amazing Stories and doing all these great, young parts as a kid, child actor. And, as often the case with child actors, you hit puberty and they kick you out the door.
Yeah.
And so when I was doing No Man's Law, I reached out to him and I said, hey, you don't know me, but would you like to, do a movie? And he was skeptical at first, and then he came and he's in one scene in No Man's Law. And then we became friends. And while we were shooting Grizzly, I said, hey, do you want to do a cameo? And so we ad-libbed that whole scene in Grizzly. That was just pure ad-lib. Kelly is a marvelous ad-libber, and he's so real and true to life that it just reads like total reality on screen. He's a great actor, actually. Very good.
He does, and I like the scene where when you're talking and you're mentioning about the fatalities caused by Monster Grizzly, and he's like, yeah, it's a shame.
The bear got him.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
That's too bad.
Yeah, and Auntie Winona over by the reservation got her too.
No kidding. That's too bad.
Because that would be a natural reaction. Some people, because you could tell he was a bit grizzled, and your character certainly was, that tired, grizzled, but heroic character. You got a little sense of that's how it might be between two gentlemen who are friends or have known each other a long time. Yeah. So I see what you mean by that.
We actually made a much longer scene initially, but we had to cut it for time. And I was kind of sad that we did, because it went on for another couple of minutes. And as we were doing it ad lib, he starts going into some character things that really I thought were great. But when we were editing it, we just you have to edit for tempo, and that extra 2 minutes really slowed the tempo of the film. So we had to shorten it, which I kind of regretted because he's so great in it. But he's a marvelous actor, always has been. It's just a shame that he, like so many other young actors, the industry is done with you when they're done with you. And he's in the trucking business now, and he's doing great. And I just, occasionally call him up and say, "Hey, take a break and come play with us." I'm hoping he'll be in the new film Demon Wolf.
He would be great. I mean, honestly, I could see both of you doing kind of like My Dinner with Andre type of thing, where it's just the two of you talking about, like the aftermath of Monster Grizzly.
Yes,
something that simple. It could be a camera and two guys in a room, and you got magic.
Yeah.
So that might be something.
I in that place between getting kicked out of Hollywood and coming back to it, I used to write a lot of books, and thankfully a lot of them got published. But I wrote a novel one time. It's called When Curly Won a Cat House, and it's about these two old fart cowboys. And I keep nudging Kelly that if he ever retires, from the trucking business long enough to do a feature-length film, I want to do that film with him, because it's exactly what you're talking about. It's two old farts by the campfire, basically, musing on life. So maybe one day.
Well, I would look forward to that. And that would be perfect for today's audiences, because we're seeing now people are moving away from Hollywood productions and they're finding stuff on YouTube. You're actually, I will sit down and watch a video podcast if I'm engaged with the story, because it's a natural storytelling vehicle. So it would make total sense for that movie to be made with Kelly.
Interestingly enough, Henry, I have gone to YouTube TV, and YouTube are probably my number one go-to place to find film content, a lot of independent film content, because the independents that can't find a distributor, and I just got completely lucky on that score, but some can't find a distributor. They try and they try and they try. You can self-distribute on YouTube and have your film seen. And I've watched some fantastic, very low. I was watching one yesterday. It was very awkward and slow in places, and the editing wasn't real tight, but it was a great little story. And I hung with it for an hour and 20 minutes. It was like, I don't care that they're not perfect. These kids are trying, and it was great. It was wonderful.
And it's realistic. And I think that's why we're seeing also a lot of, especially in the horror genre, found footage films, because you can have a really good idea and story, and well, it's not going to have that cinema magic. You don't have maybe the equipment, that will make it look as if it's something that you would see in a theater. And I find that refreshing, because there's realism to that, and you get something that's even more creative than something that you sit and you're passive for an hour and a half.
Well, I'm sick to death of Hollywood product, and have been forever, because it's all computer animated. It's all, how many dollars can we throw at the screen? How much computer animation can we do? How much? It's like Martin Scorsese says, they're all video games, you know. And Hollywood is very good at patting itself on the back as the Titanic sinks. Just a couple of years ago, 25% of the film product, domestic film product in this country, was made in LA and New York. And the rest of it was made in right-to-work states like New Mexico and Louisiana and Georgia. And that was 5 years ago. Now it's down to 18%. And it's just, they're just strangling themselves with all these horrible films, the repetitive superhero movies. And they get so excited that they make a movie and it grosses $200 million, and they pat themselves on the back. And they're just killing the business. Meanwhile, and I tell independents when I go to film festivals, I tell people, look at India, look at China, the two biggest film markets in the world. And they love independent films, and they don't care what it's about. You can do really. No Man's Law was very well received in India and China and Singapore and Bhutan, and I mean almost every Southeast Asian country and Central Asian country went nuts for No Man's Law. It was just a small film about human rights, and it just hit a chord, I guess, in a lot of these countries where human rights is a hot button issue. And you can get your film out there. You just have to find a matrix to do it with, and that can be YouTube. It can be YouTube.
I think you bring up a good point. I know as interviewing a lot of filmmakers, it seems like the eye on the prize is still being popular in the United States, or looking to make something that's
Right.
the equivalent of a Hollywood film, even if it
Right.
is lower budget, whatnot. They're still trying to compete, whereas the world really is flat now. I mean, with technology, so why wouldn't you look towards other audiences, and especially larger
Exactly.
audiences who can really get into and appreciate it? So I think that's something, from what you're telling me, that you've done that is extremely important for new filmmakers.
Well, what's interesting is, it used to be the global language was French, up until the mid 20th century. And then after World War II, English became the international business language. It's interesting how many small countries all over the world have enough people that speak English that if you release a film in English there, they don't have any trouble going to watch it or watching it on streaming, and they'll embrace it. The problem that we have as independents is always distributorship. And the film festivals are the way to go with that, because there are so many film festivals, all over the world that are dying for entrants to come so they can show the people in their community what's the latest films. And so, you get to a point where, okay, I'll market through film festivals. And you have one of the great sites for that to market your film to film festivals is filmfreeway.com. And Film Freeway is a wonderful way it's a one-stop shop. You upload your film, you put in all of your metadata, everything there, and then you decide what film festivals you want to submit it to. And it's amazing how many these small countries, I didn't know there were any film festivals in Bhutan. Bhutan's a little tiny country near Tibet, and they're movie crazy. And so we submitted to the Bhutan International Film Festival and got selected and got shown and got tremendous response. So it's not just the United States. The world is your film market, and you're shooting yourself in the foot if you're not embracing that and going globally. And Film Freeway allows you to do it from your laptop,
It's great. It streamlines the process, because that will stop a
Yeah.
lot of people saying, oh, I have to do this again. It's like sending out for a resume and cover letter for a position. And you're saying, well, I don't even know if I'm going to get it. Why bother? At least it's up there and you can send it. So really things are a lot easier. Because I remember, even like 20 years ago, you wanted to make a film, you would have to, I forget, there was a book about how to make a film for the price of a used car. I forget the gentleman who wrote it,
Yeah.
but it was like one of those things where it was like a real financial risk. But now all you need, you can shoot a film on your phone and send it out on that platform you mentioned, and possibly be in a film festival that leads to distributorship.
Well, I financed No Man's Law, first film I did. I financed it through a bank online called WebBank, and it was just a loan. It wasn't going to people in LA who were gambling their money on your film. It was just a loan that I had to pay back, and I borrowed the money and I made the film, and the film did, it broke even. I paid the loan back, and same thing with I Am Mine Alone. And since then, we've been self-financing off the profits for Grizzly and for Vampire, Interview the Vampire. Excuse me, Kiss of the Vampire.
Great film.
I wish it was Interview the Vampire, but no, Kiss of the Vampire. And so we, like any small business, you start off with borrowed capital, and then as you build a reservoir of capital, you reinvest it. So you can do it. Anybody can do it.
Well, that is inspiring. There's a lot of stories out there that need to be told, and it's a lot easier. You don't have to go through a studio system. You just need to take that chance. And that's, I think, really the story of Poverty Row, taking that chance, taking that jump.
Yeah. The whole thing behind Poverty Row, I don't know if you're familiar with Poverty Row in the history of Hollywood. In the earliest days of the film industry, all the major studios, created themselves, and all the independent producers were operating in a totally different food chain, a totally different marketplace. And they all leased studio space at a studio at the intersection of Sunset and Gower. And it was all the little low budget indies like Monogram and Lone Star and Trim Car and all Producers Releasing Corp and the earliest days of Republic. And so the big studios called that little cluster of the business Poverty Row. And so when I was talking about creating this company, I said, we're just like Poverty Row. We're disrespected independents. The majors aren't going to look at us, nor do we want them to. We're going to be just like Poverty Row back in the old days. And so that's why it's Poverty Row Pictures. And the thing about Poverty Row is, like the big studios, like in the heyday, MGM, they would, make a movie for $2 million and crow like roosters, and it made $2 million more, right? So it would be a $4 million, where the total box office would be $4 million, and they'd go, gee, we doubled our money. The studios on Poverty Row would make a movie for $10,000 and it would gross $100,000. That's a way more profit than just doubling your money.
Absolutely.
And so the goal is to do that, is to be just like those Poverty Rows, make the films on the cheap and then profit mightily, and that's the hope.
Do you see the horror genre as being key to that? Because I know a lot of, back in the day, William Castle and a lot of these older films, there's just something in the psyche of maybe Americans or people in general that horror is a genre that's loved and seems to, surpass a lot of others in regards to making your money back. But I also think with horror, it's just something that you can really have a compelling story and explore the darker parts of oneself.
Well, the great thing about horror is it can be anywhere, anytime, any place. You can make a horror movie that takes place now in New York City, or a horror movie that takes place 100 years ago in New York City, or a horror movie that takes place on Mars. The genre allows you a lot of flexibility. And the great thing about horror is that two things happen when people watch a horror movie. They want to have the jump scares. They want to be, frightened. And they want to have fun. They don't want it to be so gruelingly terrifying that when they leave the theater, they need therapy or they have PTSD. But to me, growing up in the South, I can't tell you how many times I was in a movie theater. And I don't know if you've ever been in very many horror movie theaters when the horror movies are playing, but if there's some black women in there, they start talking back to the screen and they're yelling at the screen, right? And they're having the time of their life. And of course, the character opens the door, and of course, something horrible steps out, and you're scared, but you're having fun at the same time. And that's the only genre of film really where you can do that. It's just a wonderful fluid dynamic that you can get into. And you're absolutely right. You can play some, characters with some really dark backstories that make them far more interesting than the stories where the good guys, ultimately pure and the bad guys ultimately bad, that kind of thing.
There's a lot of gray area in horror, and that's why I think that's why I've always enjoyed it. It's really a great character study.
My wife and I just recently watched a film that was produced by Noomi Rapace, who is the Swedish actor that was in the original Dragon Tattoo movies. And they shot it in Moldova. And I think it's called You Will Never Be Alone, or You Will Not Be Alone. But anyway, it's a film of an old, basically Dark Ages mythology tale about a woman who comes out of the woods and takes children, right? Kind of like she's like a witch, but not. But this movie, it has almost no dialogue. And it is so creepy and so unnerving and so brilliant that we were just sitting there watching this movie. And my wife and I looked at each other and we said, why can't we make a movie that good? I mean, we were like, it's like, who are the characters that used to yell, "We suck again"? It was like, I think I'm fairly good. And then I see something like that and I'm like, I need to just go hang it up,
Well,
And it
to
was one of
each
those
their
horror
own.
films.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was brilliant, and it was made for very little money. I think it was made for like $300,000, and it had us on the edge of our seats from the beginning to the end, and it's fun, that's horror. It's fun. You remember those, because they scared the crap out of you.
Think of like a screenwriting class, and they always say about the least amount of dialogue the better. And I always thought of The Last Man on Earth as being one of those films with Vincent Price. Like the first 30 minutes, I mean, there's some voiceover, but for the most part, it's silent. And I've always enjoyed that. So it sounds like that film strikes a chord. It's also great. Let's say if language is a barrier, you can certainly, just from a marketing standpoint, it's compelling. But you realize you don't always need the spoken word to communicate. It is a visual medium.
There was a very, very talented screenwriter named James Edward Grant, who he worked with John Wayne a lot because John Wayne didn't like to memorize dialogue, and he would take a script that someone had written and he would condense 3 pages of dialogue down to 2 lines and not lose any of the meaning. And so one of the things I try to do when I write is I generally overwrite in the beginning, and then in my subsequent rewrites, I try to do that. On a script I'm working on right now, the other night, I tore out 4 pages and looked at it and I said, okay, how can I say this? And I ended up doing it in like 4 lines. You can do it. And it makes the audience able to relax a little bit, because too much dialogue means they have to pay attention really hard, instead of just relaxing and enjoying the scene and what's going on and things like that. If you have somebody talking constantly, the viewer's mind will sort of drift off.
Yes.
So it's better for a film if there's little to no dialogue. Yeah. Absolutely.
I agree with that, because I've been playing around with writing just because I enjoy it. And I've noticed with a lot of the newer horror films, some of the ones that are more on the, let's say, the lower production value, they seem to overcompensate with dialogue when I'm like, well, that's too much. I'm getting a whole story. I feel like it's a play. I wonder if some people would naturally playwrights, but I guess they fall in love. And as all writers, you tend to fall in love with your words. But I thought what you just said before about editing and self-editing is extremely important, because that does show in a film where if it's too much dialogue, horror is about atmosphere. If there's, if somebody's talking over that atmosphere, it doesn't really work.
Well, when I was first editing No Man's Law with Steven Anselevich and his group, who I use in Birmingham, Alabama, and he was a film producer in Moscow, and then he left and came here. But Steven and I were editing the first film, and he kept saying to me, I'm amazed at how brutal you are. You're cutting your own lines. You're cutting your own lines. You're cutting your own lines. And I'm like, you look at it, you have to be able to look at it and go, okay, that doesn't work like I thought it would on paper.
Yeah.
That doesn't work. Let's cut this. Let's cut that. And the marvelous thing too with editing is you can shorten a speech. You can cut a whole sentence out of a speech. That's the most marvelous thing about a cutaway is you can like the first and the third line and hate the second line, and just take out the middle line and roll with it. So yeah, you have to understand that the audience is very intuitive, and you can use less words and more visual to make the audience understand what you're doing. If you start talking to them full time, then they're just kind of like, they'll just drift off. I mean, I can see it, all the time. When you're watching a movie, I'll be watching something, and I'm watching a new mini series on Netflix. I won't name it, and it's getting a lot of critical praise. And I'm watching it, and I'm going, "Good Lord, shut up!" Because it's just yakety, 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 and it's probably because they have an 8-episode mini series and they're trying to stretch it out.
Trying to cram all that in.
I tune out. That's just
Exactly.
Well, I tune out until somebody moves. It's like talk, 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 talk. And then someone walks out and slams the door. And when they slam the door, I go, huh? now I'm paying attention again.
It's like the old films. I remember like older films, golden era of movies where, those were trained playwrights and then everything was shot as if it was on a stage.
Yeah.
And I've seen that in some shows now
Yes.
where people just, again, they fall in love with their words, but for a visual medium, it is tough to sit through that. Now, with your two movies that are coming up, The Kiss of a Vampire and Demon Wolf, right?
Right.
What are the two? What if you can sum up what you've learned from, let's say, Monster Grizzly and the two new films coming out? What is the most valuable takeaway that you're going to apply to your next film?
Good question. Honestly, I think the thing I have learned the most in now having directed 4 films and about to direct a 5th is don't compromise the story, because you can film it. It may not be as you envisioned it as you wrote it, but you can still get it on film. I'm absolutely madly in love after Grizzly with Pitch Darkness. The climax at the end of Grizzly, we shot in pitch darkness in a blizzard using only the flashlights in our hands for light, and created such a claustrophobic sense of danger. And if we were doing that in the daylight with a guy in a bear suit, it would look ridiculous. And the same thing with Vampire. In Kiss of a Vampire, we did a lot of stuff in pitch darkness. And it's wonderful because it's the poor man's special effect, right? And you can do so much low tech, terrifying things with just using the darkness. It's just what I always tell my cinematographer, Sterling Brown. I always say, let's do this with a single light source in pitch darkness and see how it looks. And he always goes, yeah, let's do it, because he's a great cinematographer. And he'll set the camera apertures and everything, and people will just appear out of darkness, and or they'll be barely visible, and then they'll suddenly step out, and it's creepy as hell. It's creepy as hell, and it costs zero. There's no special effect cost involved. So I've learned that you can tell as wild a story as you want, because Kiss of a Vampire is extremely out there, and you can tell the story, and you don't have to bury yourselves in high tech, very expensive graphics and CGI and all that to get it done. Use the techniques that they were using 70 years ago. They still work.
Well, Richard, as we wind down, I always like to ask this question: what is your favorite horror film?
Oh, wow, good question. Brotherhood of the Wolf.
I saw that in the movie theater. The cinematography is great.
Yeah, French film. Le Pacte de Loup with Vincent Cassel and a whole bunch of French actors. There's something in that film, I don't know what it is, that every time I watch it, I'm watching it like it's the first time. And I think I like it because it's not trying to connive fear. It's drawing fear from the natural fear of something inexplainable, and that's the first one that comes to mind. I mean, as a kid, I still think the first sound Dracula with Bela Lugosi is absolute art, as is The Mummy with Boris Karloff, as is The Invisible Man with Claude Rains, The Screaming Skull from back in the 1950s. All just terrific. But when I think about a really high quality horror film that's not just a horror film, like we were talking about, it has another genre element to it. I think it's probably Brotherhood of the Wolf.
Well, Richard, I see that we're starting to run out of time. I would love to have you back again because
I'd
the
love
audience
that.
might not know we had some technical difficulty, which all worked out, all beautiful. But I'd love you to come back and talk about The Kiss of a Vampire and also Demon Wolf. If you need somebody to play a family member with a beard, you know, you got a great beard. I'm aspiring to your beard. You know, I'm here. But is there anything you'd like to plug before you leave?
No, I mean, I appreciate your interest in Monster Grizzly. I appreciate you mentioning The Kiss of a Vampire. The only plug I have is ask everybody to once a week watch an independent film on a streaming channel. I will recommend the channel Fossum to you. It's the word awesome with an F in front of it. They have a section called World Cinema, and you click on that, and it's by country. And you can pick a country and start watching independent films from countries all over the world. And I have spent a great deal of time watching independent films from countries that I didn't even know had a film industry. And it's a really good way to you know, help those independent filmmakers, because every click they get, you know, a compensation. I don't know, you know, what they're getting, but assuming it's, you know, a nickel a click or something, you're at least rewarding that independent filmmaker for their efforts.
Well, thank you so much to Richard Jensen. We'll have you back. Love it. Guys, please like and subscribe. Please hit notification bell for all new notification. And thank you for coming down the rabbit hole with us, friends.